Hi folks, you alright? Hey, it's raining outside, it's a right miserable day here. But anyway, welcome to another Raw Therapee video. And the other day, I had this message off one of my patrons, Saul. And he says, I enjoy and learn boatloads from your videos. Nice one, Saul. Please consider a video on how to use RGB curves under the Colour tab and or lab adjustments under the Exposure tab to make changes based on information from the RGB histograms. Yes, right. I have not developed a photographer's eye, so I am not able to see the effect of some of the changes you make based on your visual take of a picture. So I am looking for a way to enhance a picture based on information from the histogram. I found the following article, blah, 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 off this website to see if it can help. Thanks in advance. And the article that he's talking about is this article here by a guy called Steve Hoffman. Who Steve Hoffman is, I have no idea. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting reading, but oh dear. I have a problem with RGB curves, and I also have a bit of a problem with people sort of putting too much emphasis on histograms. Histograms tell you when things are going wrong, but they very, very rarely tell you if things are going right, okay? Think about that one for a moment. So I'm just going to get rid of the old interweb. And I'll say to Saul's message. Okay, and so RGB curves and histograms. Alrighty. So let's pull out the histogram on this image for a start off. And let's make it bigger so we can see what we're talking about. And we'll stretch it out that way and we will open it out that way. Okay. For anybody who's interested, if you put your cursor over here inside the body of the histogram and hold down your left mouse button, you can sort of scale the stop values, because that's what these vertical delineations are. They are stop values. So yeah, so we're obviously aware visually when we look at this image that there's a blue cast on it. And what's caused the blue cast? A 10-stop ND filter is what's caused the blue cast. I think it was a 10-stop anyway. What was the exposure on it? 61 seconds. Yes, it was a 10-stopper. All right. So the thing about the histogram in this image here, what you've got to remember is you're actually looking at the histogram of the image displayed. You're not looking at the raw histogram. If you want to go and look at the raw histogram, you have to go there, all right, and click this little green, red, blue, green checkerboard icon there. That is the raw histogram. That is the histogram of the raw file. And you can see that it is fundamentally underexposed by 3/4 of a stop, because I'm trying to hang on to these horrible highlights in the sky. It's a very, very boring, bland shot, horrible grim grey day. You've seen this picture before, so I'm not going to bother describing the atmosphere again. But it is what it is, you know. And so that's the raw histogram. This is the only real data that you've got to work with. And to be quite honest with you, especially in this instance, it's not really worth a great deal. It can just tell you where your exposure lies within the grand scheme of things, as it's actually been recorded in the raw file. If we start looking over here, this isn't the histogram of the raw file. This is the histogram of this image. And therefore, when we make changes to this image, those changes will be reflected in the histogram. So, first of all, trying to make adjustments based on the histogram, it's a bit like trying to play soccer and trying to score a goal against a moving goalpost. Yeah? The histogram is a bit of a moving feast. It only tells you or gives you information based on what you've just done here and here. All right? So, you know, I mean, this is why I said it tells you when things are going bad, but it doesn't really tell you a great deal about when things are going good. So you sort of work it out by a process of elimination. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but well, there you go, that's me. I'm in one of those oversimplification moods today. But Saul's main question focused on these puppies here, RGB curves, under the colour tab. Okay. And I can't refer him back to another video that I've already done because I've never done a video with RGB curves because I never use the damn things. And you'll see why in a moment, because to me they only do half the job and they don't really do it all that well, to be quite honest with you. I'm not a big fan of Darktable. Me and Darktable just do not get on. I don't understand it. And, you know, there's one good thing about Darktable and RGB curves, though. And it's the fact that you can have more than one instance of the same module. And so you can bring the RGB curves to bear 2-3 times or more, as far as I know. At least twice, because I've seen Uncle Bruce, g'day Bruce, Bruce Williams, do it in one of his videos. I love watching Bruce's videos, but even with Bruce's tuition, I can't get my head around Darktable. It's just too much like hard work. But anyway, there we go, that's an entire other story. But you'll see here, in the RGB curves, let's go and turn them on first off. We've got Luminosity Mode, and it's unchecked. So we can work in luminosity mode, or if we have it unchecked, we're working in colour mode. And let me just explain the difference. So let's go and put a control cage curve. And of course my Mac does this garbage all the damn time, where I can't sort of get rid of these overlays here. There we go, sorted. So if I'm in colour mode, i.e. luminosity mode is unchecked, if I sort of grab the midtone, say, if I move them up, the image goes red, alright? If I move it down, the image goes not blue, it goes cyan. So if I zero that, if I make any point come above this linear line, this linear dividing line here. So if, in other words, if I move any point into this top triangle of this histogram chart, the image will go red. And obviously the more I move it up along the curve, yep, sort of like that, then the red will be applied more to the highlights, okay, and less to the shadows. And then of course if I move the shadows and the darker midtones up, then everything goes to pot, but it all goes red. And similarly I can make the shadows go blue or cyan, and I can make the highlights go red. Yeah, how cool's that? Welcome to Tatooine. Yeah, alrighty. Now then, the only thing is, if I leave that adjustment there, but switch this curve into luminosity mode, that looks a bit different, doesn't it? Yep, because if we're out of luminosity mode, when we make an adjustment here, we're adjusting colour, alright? But when we're in luminosity mode, what we're doing is we are adjusting luminosity, yes, and keeping the colour, alright? So in luminosity mode, we alter the brightness, but keep the colour the same. And in colour mode, in other words with luminosity mode unchecked, we change the colour, but keep the brightness, alrighty, okie dokie. Now, we must bear in mind that these curves do not behave in quite the same way as curves that you might be used to. If we just go over to the exposure tab and we just hit auto match tone curve. Yep, now that has made changes to both lightness, darkness, contrast and colour. Alright, we could re-zero that out and we could make our own changes to make it brighter in the upper mid-tones, darker in the shadows. So we've thrown a boatload of contrast into there, which we don't really want to do. But it makes changes all across the image, all right? And they're usually contrast changes. That's the sort of way that we, or the sort of result that we expect when we actually invoke a curve. Now we go in the opposite way and we're flattening out the contrast in the midtones, alrighty. But of course we don't want to do anything like that at all. And so what we'll do is we'll come back to the RGB curves and let's just zoom out a little bit. Okay, so we're still looking at this image. So without that luminosity mode ticked, we're working in colour mode. So let's now have a look at the histogram to get back to source point. Now, if we look in the shadows, we can see that red, green and blue are fairly close together. But over here in the highlights, they are very, very separated. And blue has got a lot more presence than green, which in turn has got a lot more presence than red. So in our highlights, we've got this colour shift. And all we're going to do is just for reference, we'll get a colour picker and we'll go in there, colour sampler. And so we can actually see the actual colour distribution, or the distribution of the three channels in terms of luminosity within that sampled area. So you see that red is 51.8, green is 57 and blue is 66. So it's pretty obvious we've got a blue cast, but we don't need these numbers to tell us we've got a blue cast, and we don't need the histogram to tell us we've got a blue cast, because we've got a pair of eyes in our head and we can see we've got a blue cast. Yeah, so please, please, please don't get hung up on the numbers or the histograms too much. Yeah, use your eyes, you process with your eyes. All right, so what are we going to do? So blue is prevalent. What we can do is we can come to the blue, let's go and put a control cage curve on, and so we've got the blue RGB curve, and it's in colour mode, okay, not luminosity mode. So if I take the highlights and I move them down, of course, what am I doing? I'm going to add yellow, all right, which is the opposite of blue. It's the complementary secondary colour of primary blue. But if I just pull it down a little bit and I watch the histogram, so watch this blue peak on the histogram, I'll reset the curve and do it again. If I grab this point and pull straight down, as I pull it down, you'll see that the blue curve now matches the green curve. Alrighty. So that has got, if you like, our blue distribution in line with our green. If I now come to the red curve, how can I add red? It's very simple. Remember when we took away blue in the highlights, we moved the highlights down. If I grab the highlight slider in the red channel and move it across, as I move it across, you'll see the red is now in line with the green and the blue. And look at the colour numbers, please, in this colour picker. Red 57.6, green 57.6, blue 57.6. How well colour balanced do you want that sky? Alrighty. So there we go. That's one way we can use these RGB curves. If we just left click and scroll across and open the histogram up, we can see we are still pretty much, give or take, in line with all three colours at the same values in our shadows as well. So if we did a print of this, not that we would because it's not finished, it's just way too dark, but I wouldn't be able to see a blue cast in my shadow. And we certainly ain't got a blue cast in my upper mid-tones or my highlights, okay? So we've got a fairly neutral colour balance. Right, so let's now re-zero all of that and all of that, okay? And we will switch to luminosity mode. Oh dear, right. Now some people find this useful, some people don't. But here we go. So the blue channel is really containing quite a lot of data about the sky. I don't want the sky any brighter, but there's a lot of darker data in the blue channel that I could do with brightening up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a point on my mid-tone. Alright, that's halfway across and halfway up the curved grid. And then I'm going to put another point around about there. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to lock this part of the curve. Right, I'm trying to lock it in place. Because what I'm going to do now is come to the shadows and I'm just going to lift those shadows up in the blue channel. Yeah, and I don't want them to be affecting this area all that much. But we have made quite a marked difference within the blue channel to the actual densities in the darker areas of the image. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come here and click this icon here, which will allow me to copy that curve to the clipboard. I'm then going to come to the green channel, and we'd better go and put a control cage on there, and then hopefully we'll be able to get to everything. And I'm going to come to this icon here, which is paste curve from clipboard. Yeah, now you can see I'm lifting the exposure in the shadows in those two channels. Let's now go to the red channel and let's paste that curve again. Alright, so now what we've done is we've effectively dropped the contrast, which now has brought, if you like, the sky more in line with the foreground. The foreground is less dark. It's obviously gone a little bit on the flat side, but you see now we can't switch it out of luminosity mode to go and do anything about the colour balance. This is why I'm not keen. This is why the Darktable users are quite fortunate, because they could invoke a second instance of the RGB curves and, you know, they could work in colour balance mode, which will be quite handy. So, you know, I mean, what are we left with? We're left with no alternative but to fundamentally go and white balance the image with a colour picker. And there you go. So now we can see where our image is at. And now we've white balanced the image. Let's just get rid of this colour picker here. I mean, you can see from the numbers we're perfectly white balanced. 60, 60, 60. So if we can get a perfect white balance with the colour picker tool, why would we actually bother trying to get a good white balance with the RGB curves? And, you know, I mean, there are other ways of producing the image as flat as this with other tools. But, you know, I mean, we're using the RGB curves. And so all I'm going to do is right click and right click again. No, I'm not. Shouldn't have right click, should I? Right, put my hand over there, and then there we go. And that's got rid of that colour picker. So I suppose we could go and invoke a little bit of soft light on there. And has it made a great deal of difference? Should we turn it up a little bit? Yes, we're adding a little tiny bit there. You can see that the blue is still out of alignment, but it's only out of alignment in the shadows. But we're in luminosity mode. Can we do anything in the shadows? Just put another control point in there, and let's just try and make an adjustment to this very, very base blue right down in the shadows. And you see, we're chasing it, but are we going to get it to come into line? There we go. That's not too bad. So you can see we've kept that portion of the curve straight. We've lightened up the darker mid-tones and the upper shadows. And then what we've done is we've now dropped the shadows down to virtually zero input-output. You can see the input is 0, 0, 0 and the output is 1.989. In other words, 2. So we are lightening those shadows just a little bit. But now you can see from the histogram, our white point is pretty much in line, as we knew with the colour balance in the sky. But now we've sort of added a little bit of refinement down here in the darker tones, or in the very deep shadows, to actually negate a blue cast in the shadows. But it's a bit of a Heath Robinson way of working, that is, and it's, you know, it's not the sort of thing I really like doing. And as I said, there's more than one way to actually produce this self-same result. That's why I don't really use the RGB curves. Let's move on to another image. And so let's just go and add our... I use control cage curves out of preference, but you don't have to. You can use whatever curve you want. I just like control cages, but, you know. So what can we do with this image? We've got a different style of, or a different sort of histogram. Let's give that a good old stretch out. So we can see, again, we've got a blue channel which is trailing in the shadows but slightly advanced in the highlights. Our green channel and our red channel are pretty much together. So in terms of colour, if we stay with the blue channel, if we pull the highlight down a little tad, let's go and turn the RGB curves on. That would help, wouldn't it? So if we just pull them down a little tad, and so we've got everything in line down here. The peaks are pretty much in line in the highlights, but of course we've still got this trail in the shadows and in the darker and mid-tones, right? So what we can do here is actually move the curve up. All right. But the only thing is, what we've now done is we've got red and green. So we've come too far in the shadows. It's making too much of an adjustment using this straight line variant. And it's throwing actually magenta and red into the darker mid-tones and the shadows. So we'll just pull that down just a smidge. And what we'll do is we will lock again by putting a couple of points across here. I might just put one there as well, because what we can do is we can identify in the image where a particular tone lies within this blue curve just by clicking this button and sort of hovering over it. And where are we a little bit suspect? You see this bright area, we're in a 4x4 pixel sample area. Let's turn that to an 8x8. So the clouds, let's just go and reset that. So the clouds are where that white line, that white vertical line is. The hills are just a little smidge above that point there. So I don't want to be making any adjustments to anything brighter than this side of the hill here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this curve down, this point down a little tiny bit. Then what we'll do is we'll just try lifting those shadows up just a little bit. And you can see that blue down in the shadows is very, very sensitive. But if I just open up the little register number grid again, you can see the blue in the shadows is now pretty much in line with the green and the red. So I'm not going to get a blue shift in me very darkish shadows. And our input is 0 and our output is 1.42. So, you know, I mean, yeah. What we could do is try and address this little peak shift here. But it just gets a little bit fiddly. All right. We've addressed it a little bit there. Little bit. Just got this a little bit more in line. Just brought this a little bump a little bit more in line. We've left the shadows or the darks undisturbed. We've left the highlights undisturbed. We've got this trailing blue here, which will be somewhere around about here, I would imagine. So we could try putting a little bump in there. You see, we are moving the right-hand edge, but we're not moving the left-hand edge. So maybe if we come to here, there we go. And we can sort of try and neutralise everything, rather like that. And, you know, with that sort of colour balancing this image to a point of RGB neutrality, which doesn't really suit the image, to be quite honest with you. It's not realistic. The light was very, very warm toned. So, you know, I mean, this is why I sort of had a bit of a chuckle when Saul said he wants to work off the information on the histogram, because A, it is a moving feast, so you can't really base an adjustment you're going to do formulated on what the histogram is telling you now. You've got to wait till the histogram, till you've done the move with the tool before the histogram tells you whether it's good or not. The histogram info comes after the adjustment, not before. But of course, as we've just seen, you can use the information in that histogram to prompt the move that you're going to make, which is what we've just been doing. But of course, it's not adding anything to the image, not really. From a development point of view, if we could bring another RGB curve module in, we could keep this colour balance, and then in a second module we could do the luminosity mode bit and sort of lift up some of these colours here and start to bring out the colours in the image. But of course we can't do that because we can't just go and put it all in luminosity mode, otherwise it'll turn really horrible when we go and make any other adjustment. As you can see, if I go to the red channel and we start by trying to bring up the reds, everything's sort of going a little bit magenta, and we've got our blue shift back and everything's turned to, I would say rat poo, but I'll just say junk instead. So, you know, I mean, we are a little bit knackered on that. Let's take it out of luminosity mode, and thank God all my hard work and fiddling around with this blue channel has now brought us that neutral histogram back, which I didn't really like in the first place, but well, there you go. Obviously, if we've done the colour balancing of the image that way, we could then come over and add a graduated filter. We could then sort of turn that round like that, and then just lift up the foreground a little bit. Visualize where the filter is. Let's get a bit of the feather going on that, And let's sort of lift it up a little bit. Yeah, sort of like that. Maybe add a little bit more brightness in the foreground. Yeah, but, you know, that's not really a very good processing for that image. Not really. Oh dear, dear, dear. There are way better ways of processing this image, as I'm sure I've already shown you. But what else was Saul asking about? He was asking about lab. Alrighty. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch this image back. In point of fact, I'm going to switch both of them back to my base.pp3. So we'll go here and we'll neutralize all the adjustments on there. My profiles, my base.pp3. And so we're back with this problem of color balance again. And let's switch back over to lab. And let's open up the lab adjustments. And there we go. Let's activate lab adjustments. So how do we address colour balance in lab? You can do with the curves, because we can change all sorts of curves in lab. But really and truly, do you want to? Because we can get a nice even colour balance on this image just by doing that. Okay. Then what we could do is come back over to lab. Get off. There we go. Come back over to lab, and we could then go and open up a control cage curve for lab for the L channel. So now all we're doing is changing luminosity. So we might want to open up the shadows a little bit. We might want to depress the highlights a little bit, rather like that, and then start to lift up certain portions of the histogram, rather like that. Okay, and then begin to drop those highlights in the sky. But there again, you see, we've kept our white balance in the highlights. We've got a good white balance in the shadows. I'm not really bothered about the midtones exactly, but we are messing around with, you know, contrast at the end of the day. And we can, I've done an extensive video on everything to do with lab. I'll put a link to it in the description below, and you'll doubtless see a little thing for it in the video right now in the top right hand corner. So if you've not seen that, go and check that out. How to control your image and how to adjust your image using the lab adjustments, and we go through all of these controls. But at the end of the day, you know, if we go back to our original interpretation of the raw file, and all we've done is white balance it, we can very simply come to dynamic range. And where's it gone now? I thought I'd just opened that. Let's go and turn dynamic range compression on. And yeah, you see, that has done a pretty good job of dropping the exposure in the sky. We could actually change the balance of the dynamic range compensation and shift it more over towards the highlights. So what that's doing is that's sort of lifting up the darker areas to match. We can get the detail slider, and we can somewhat unintuitively, I think, move it down towards the left, which actually makes things look even lighter in here. But you'll notice we haven't got such a drastic contrast decrease using the dynamic range compression. And now you see we're opening up those shadows just a wee bit more. If we take the detail slider further over to the right, you can see we start to bring in more darkness into that area that we've just lifted the exposure on. So, you know, I mean, it is what it is, but now you can see that we've got a discrepancy over here in our shadows. So what we could do is go back to the RGB curves, activate them, just simply come into this blue channel with a control cage curve, or we'll neutralize that because we don't want that. But if I just nail that curve down by putting 2 or 3 points in to just keep it locked, and then just in the very, very darkest shadows, I just start to lift up, and you can see over in the histogram, this blue line or blue trace or track of the blue channel in the shadow area is rapidly coming over to meet up with the greens. All right, and there we go. We've got a different contrast distribution in the image, but we've got a damn good white balance in the highlights, a damn good white balance in the shadows. So there you go. So that's a mixture of using one of the RGB curves in colour mode together with not lab so much as dynamic range compression. So I hope that's given you some sort of understanding of how we can use the data that we can see in the image histogram. Don't forget, this is the histogram of the image that we are working on. All right, and so I will do an in-depth dive into the histogram panel at a later date once Raw Therapee 5.9 public release is out, but that's another story as well, and I've sort of sidetracked myself. So I hope that's sort of giving you a bit of an inkling as to how you can use the information that you can visualize in the histogram to actually prompt adjustments. You can use lab if you want, but it's always, with Raw Therapee, there's always more than one way to skin the cat. Yeah, so dynamic range in this case has worked quite well and been a lot less neither and bother to use than lab would, because we would have had to most likely use at least 2 curves in lab to achieve the same result as we've got here. So, and everybody else, I hope that's proved interesting for you. If you like this video, if you have found it useful, give it a thumbs up, leave a nice comment below, tell your friends about it. Don't forget, give it a like, give it a subscribe. I could do with some more subscribers. Yes, I could. I'm very grateful to all those of you who do subscribe, and I'm even more grateful for those of you who do subscribe and ask me for videos. Yes, for God's sake, guys, give me some ideas, will you? Yeah. I will do what you want me to do. I always have a bit more confidence in giving you videos that you'll appreciate when you've actually asked for them, rather than me sort of plucking something out of the air and giving it to you. But anyway, there we go. That's my little plea over and done with. So yeah, until the next time, guys, stay safe, stay well, keep taking the pictures, and I'll speak to you very soon. Tooroo.